My name is Valerie, and I'm 32 years old working as an elementary school teacher. I never imagined that my mother-in-law's dinner invitation to celebrate my husband Rick's promotion would turn into a night of public humiliation. After 4 years of marriage to her son, I thought I'd earned my place in the family. I was wrong. That night, as I sat with an empty plate while everyone else enjoyed their meals, something inside me changed forever. If you're watching this right now, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you've ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult situation. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened when I finally decided I deserved better. I grew up in a small Midwestern town called Riverview, where everyone knew each other and Friday night football games were the highlight of the week. My father worked as a mechanic at the local auto shop and my mother was a receptionist at the town's medical clinic. We weren't poor, but we definitely lived paycheck to paycheck. My parents emphasized the importance of education and hard work, believing these values would open doors for their children. From a young age, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. There was something magical about helping children discover their potential, watching their eyes light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school to save for college, and with the help of scholarships and student loans, I earned my teaching degree from the state university. I was 26 and teaching second grade at Riverside Elementary when my life changed completely. My college roommate Jenna was getting married and I reluctantly agreed to be her bridesmaid despite my tight budget. That's where I met Richard Harrington, Rick, who was the best man and childhood friend of the groom. Rick stood out immediately, not just because of his tall frame and warm smile, but because of how attentively he listened to people. While other guests at the wedding were networking or scrolling through their phones, Rick engaged in genuine conversations. When he approached me at the reception, I was instantly drawn to his unpretentious charm. "You must be Valerie," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "I've heard so much about you from Jenna." We danced that night, and when he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. What I didn't know then was that Rick came from one of the wealthiest families in the region. His father, William Harrington, had built Harrington Development from the ground up, transforming it into a real estate empire that shaped the skylines of several major cities. Rick had followed a different path, pursuing architecture rather than property development, but he still moved in circles far removed from my own. Our backgrounds couldn't have been more different, but we connected on a deeper level. Rick loved my passion for teaching and my straightforward approach to life. I appreciated his creativity and the way he remained grounded despite his privileged upbringing. 3 months after we met, we were officially dating, and a year later, he proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. That's when I first met his mother, Constance Harrington. She hosted an engagement dinner at their family estate, a sprawling mansion that made me feel like I'd walked onto a movie set. Constance greeted me with ear kisses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So you're the teacher," she said, giving me a once-over that made me instantly aware of my department store dress. How quaint. Throughout that dinner, Constance peppered me with questions that felt more like an interrogation than genuine interest. Where had I gone to school? Did I plan to continue teaching after marriage? Was I familiar with the social obligations that came with being a Harrington? Each question carried an underlying message: you don't belong here. Rick noticed my discomfort and tried to redirect the conversation, but Constance was relentless. "I'm just getting to know the girl who captured my son's heart," she would say with a saccharine smile. Is that so wrong? Despite the rocky start with Constance, Rick and I married in a ceremony that tried to bridge our different worlds. I wanted something simple. The Harringtons pushed for extravagance. We compromised on a garden wedding at their estate, but with personal touches that reflected our relationship. Constance supervised every detail, often changing my selections when I wasn't present. The flowers I chose were too common, the music too unsophisticated, the menu lacking in refinement. On our wedding day, Constance pulled me aside just before the ceremony. I thought perhaps she was finally ready to welcome me to the family. "Richard has always been impulsive," she said, instead adjusting my veil with cold precision. "But he's a Harrington, and Harringtons always protect what's theirs. Remember that." The warning was clear, but in my wedding day happiness, I chose to ignore it. Rick loved me, and that was all that mattered. The first years of our marriage were a constant navigation of Constance's subtle disapproval. She would forget to invite me to family functions, then act surprised when Rick brought me anyway. She would gift Rick expensive watches or custom suits, but present me with generic gift cards. During holidays at the Harrington home, she would reminisce about Rick's ex-girlfriends, all daughters of her country club friends, all with the right pedigree. Rick struggled with his mother's behaviour. Sometimes he would defend me, telling Constance to be more respectful. Other times he would dismiss her actions, telling me, "That's just how Mom is. She'll warm up to you eventually." I tried everything to win Constance's approval. I volunteered for her charity committees, learned about wine and art to participate in her conversations, even took etiquette classes in secret so I wouldn't embarrass myself at formal dinners. Nothing worked. To Constance, I would always be the public school teacher who had somehow tricked her son into marriage. By our 4th anniversary, I had almost resigned myself to a lifetime of cold tolerance from my mother-in-law. Rick and I were happy together in our own home, a comfortable but modest house that we chose together despite Constance's insistence that we move into one of the Harrington properties. I continued teaching now in 4th grade, and Rick was making a name for himself at Preston & Associates, an architectural firm specialising in sustainable design. When Rick called me from work one Tuesday afternoon, his voice was brimming with excitement. "They've made me senior partner," he said, "the youngest in the firm's history." I was ecstatic for him. Rick had worked incredibly hard for this promotion, often staying late, to perfect his designs, travelling to conferences to learn new sustainable building techniques and mentoring junior architects. This recognition was well deserved. "We need to celebrate," I told him. "What if we go away for the weekend? That lakeside cabin we loved is probably available." Before Rick could respond, I heard his office phone ringing in the background. He promised to call back after the meeting. When he did, his news surprised me. "My mother wants to host a dinner to celebrate the promotion, he said, "at Le Ciel this Friday." Le Ciel was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, requiring reservations months in advance. It was the kind of place where meals cost more than my weekly grocery budget, where waiters wore white gloves and menus didn't list prices. "She already made the reservations," Rick continued. "She says it's important to mark this occasion properly." A flutter of anxiety settled in my stomach. Constance had never voluntarily included me in any celebration before. Why start now? But Rick sounded so pleased by his mother's apparent support that I pushed my concerns aside. "That sounds lovely," I said, trying to infuse enthusiasm into my voice. "It's very thoughtful of your mother." That night, as we lay in bed, Rick turned to me with a boyish grin. "I think Mom is finally seeing how happy we are together," he said. "This dinner could be a new beginning." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to believe him, but 4 years of experience told me to be cautious. Still, as I drifted off to sleep, I allowed myself a small hope that perhaps Constance had finally accepted me as part of the family. Looking back, I should have recognized the dinner invitation for what it really was. Not an olive branch, but the setup for my most public humiliation yet. The days leading up to the dinner were filled with nervous anticipation. I wanted everything to be perfect, to give Constance no reason to find fault with me. I spent hours searching for the right dress. Something elegant, but not flashy sophisticated, but not trying too hard. I finally found a navy blue sheath dress that looked professional, but still special enough for the occasion. The morning of the dinner, I scheduled an appointment at a salon for a blowout, something I rarely indulged in on my teacher's salary. The stylist created soft waves that framed my face, making me feel confident and beautiful. I even splurged on a professional makeup application, asking for something natural but polished. "Big night?" the makeup artist asked as she applied a subtle rose lipstick. "My husband got a big promotion," I replied. "His mother is hosting a dinner to celebrate." "That's nice of her," the woman said, making a small adjustment to my eyeshadow. "Yes," I agreed, though uncertainty lingered in my mind. "Very nice." Throughout the day, Constance called Rick multiple times to confirm details. Each call added another layer to the evening's plan. Cocktails in the private lounge before dinner, a special menu the chef had created just for us, a photographer from the society pages to document the occasion. Rick relayed these updates to me with increasing excitement, while my sense of unease grew stronger. "Did she say who else will be there?" I asked after his third call with her. "Just family and close friends," Rick assured me. "Dad, of course, my sister Audrey and her husband, and some of Mum's friends from the club." "What about my parents?" I asked. My mother and father still lived in Riverview, but they often drove in for special occasions. Rick's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. I asked Mum about that, but she said the reservation was already set for a specific number of people, and your parents wouldn't be comfortable at Le Ciel anyway. That should have been my second warning sign. My parents might not frequent five-star restaurants, but they knew how to conduct themselves in any setting. More importantly, they were family. If this dinner was truly about celebrating Rick's accomplishment with loved ones, they should have been included. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't want to dampen Rick's excitement or create tension before what he clearly saw as an important evening, so I pushed down my disappointment and finished getting ready, determined to make the best of the situation. Rick whistled appreciatively when I emerged from our bedroom. "You look stunning, Wei," he said, pulling me close for a kiss. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "So do you," I replied, straightening his tie. "Senior partner Harrington." He grinned and offered me his arm. "Shall we, Mrs. Harrington?" The drive to Le Ciel took us through the wealthiest part of the city past gated estates and manicured parks. The restaurant itself was housed in a renovated historical building, its limestone facade illuminated by subtle lighting that highlighted its architectural details. A valet in a crisp uniform opened my door and helped me out of the car. The maitre d' greeted Rick by name, a sign of how frequently the Harringtons dined there, and led us through the main dining room toward a separate area in the back. The restaurant was everything I had heard about: crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers on every table, soft classical music playing in the background, and waitstaff who moved with silent efficiency. Constance had reserved the Phoenix Room, a private dining space, with its own dedicated waitstaff. As we entered, I took in the scene with growing apprehension. The long table was set with fine china and crystal elaborate floral arrangements, creating a barrier down the center. Name cards marked each place setting, and I noticed immediately that Rick was seated at one end near his father, while my place was at the opposite end, far from any familiar faces. Constance herself was already there holding court in a designer dress that probably cost more than my annual classroom supplies budget. She air-kissed Rick on both cheeks before turning to me with a cool assessment. "Valerie, that dress is very sensible," she said, managing to make the compliment sound like criticism. "Come, everyone is arriving." The other guests filed in. Rick's father, William, who greeted me with genuine warmth. Audrey and her investment banker husband, Marcus, who barely acknowledged me. And a collection of Constance's friends, women with expensive highlights and surgical enhancements, who looked at me with curious disdain. I searched for a friendly face and found none. These people had known each other for decades, shared histories and inside jokes, that excluded me by their very nature. As cocktails were served, I found myself drifting to the periphery of conversations, unable to contribute to discussions about recent trips to Capri or the latest drama at the country club. Rick tried to include me at first, pulling me into conversations and keeping his hand at the small of my back. But Constance was skilled at separation tactics. She would call Rick away to meet someone, or deliberately start conversations about people I didn't know. Gradually, he drifted toward the other end of the room, engaged in a discussion with his father and some senior partners from his firm, who had apparently been invited without my knowledge. When we were finally seated for dinner, the physical distance between Rick and me became even more pronounced. I was surrounded by Constance's friends, women who spoke to each other but rarely to me. When they did address me, it was to ask condescending questions. "Valerie, do you follow the stock market at all?" one woman asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "Or are you too busy with those adorable children you teach?" Another added with a laugh that held no real humor. I answered politely, trying to maintain my dignity while feeling increasingly out of place. Across the table, Constance dominated the conversation, speaking loudly about Rick's accomplishments, as if she had been personally responsible for them. "Richard always showed such promise," she was saying. "Even as a child, I knew he would uphold the Harrington legacy." The first real indication that something was wrong came when the waiters began serving the appetizers. Delicate plates of seared scallops appeared in front of every guest, except me. I waited thinking perhaps they were serving by sections, but as everyone else received their food, my place remained empty. I caught the eye of a waiter who was refilling water glasses. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I think my appetizer may have been missed." The young man looked confused and slightly uncomfortable. "Let me check on that, ma'am," he said, disappearing toward the kitchen. Constance's friend Judith, seated to my right, noticed the exchange. "No appetizer, dear? How odd." The waiter returned moments later, leaning down to speak quietly near my ear. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I've been informed that no appetizer was ordered for your place setting." Before I could respond, Constance's voice carried down the table. "Oh, is there a problem?" All eyes turned toward me, and I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. "It seems no appetizer was ordered for me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Constance's expression was one of practiced surprise. How strange. I gave them the exact number of guests. She signaled to the head waiter, who approached with a deferential bow. There seems to be some confusion, she said. My daughter-in-law doesn't have an appetizer. I apologize for the oversight, Mrs. Harrington, the man said. I can have the kitchen prepare something immediately. Oh, don't trouble them, Constance replied with a dismissive wave. I'm sure Valerie doesn't mind waiting for the main course. She's not accustomed to multiple courses anyway, are you, dear? The comment landed like a slap. Around the table I saw smirks and exchanged glances. They knew. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Across the room, Rick was engaged in conversation with his father and hadn't noticed the situation. I considered calling him over, but hesitated. Making a scene would only validate Constance's obvious opinion that I lacked the proper breeding for these situations. So I sat with my empty place setting, sipping water and pretending not to notice the pitying glances from the waitstaff. I told myself it was a simple mistake, though deep down I knew better. What I didn't realize was that the appetizer was just the beginning of Constance's carefully orchestrated evening of exclusion. The humiliation continued with mathematical precision when the main courses arrived. The waiter approached our section of the table, carrying plates of perfectly seared Wagyu steak, each one artfully arranged with truffle-infused sides and delicate garnishes. Once again, every seat received a plate except mine. This time I didn't even have to say anything. The woman across from me, one of Constance's tennis partners, noticed immediately. No entree either, she asked, and her eyebrows raised in exaggerated concern. How peculiar. Heads turned in my direction, and the conversation at our end of the table died down. I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I realized this was no accident. Constance had deliberately instructed the restaurant not to serve me. The same waiter who had helped me before approached, his discomfort now obvious. I'm very sorry, ma'am, he whispered. There appears to be another misunderstanding. What exactly is the misunderstanding? I asked quietly. He hesitated, clearly caught between professional discretion and human decency. I was told that certain guests would be ordering separately, he finally said. Your name is on that list. From the other end of the table, Constance's voice rang out. Is there another problem, Valerie? The entire table fell silent. Even Rick was paying attention, now his conversation with his colleagues interrupted by his mother's loud inquiry. It seems I don't have a main course either, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. Rick started to stand. What? That's ridiculous. But Constance cut him off smoothly. Oh dear. Another mix-up. I'm so sorry, Valerie. I only ordered for family members. I assumed you'd want to order separately. The statement hung in the air, its meaning unmistakable. After 4 years of marriage to her son, Constance was publicly declaring that I was not family. Rick's face registered shock, then anger. Mum, what are you talking about? Valerie is my wife. She's absolutely family. Constance laughed lightly. Of course, dear. I just meant I ordered for the Harrington family specifically. It's a set menu the chef prepared especially for us. She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Valerie, why don't you order whatever you'd like? My treat, of course. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Around the table, reactions varied. Audrey was smirking openly, William looked uncomfortable, but said nothing, and Constance's friends watched with the avid interest of spectators at a blood sport. The waiter stood awkwardly at my side, caught in the middle of this family drama. Would you like to see a menu, ma'am? He asked softly. The humiliation was complete. If I accepted the menu now, I would be acknowledging my separate status. If I made a scene, I would be confirming Constance's unspoken accusation that I lacked the sophistication to handle these situations gracefully. That won't be necessary, I said, placing my napkin on the table. I seem to have lost my appetite. Rick was now making his way around the table toward me, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Valerie, what's going on? Before I could answer, Constance intervened again. Richard, your steak is getting cold. I'm sure Valerie is fine. She's just not used to formal dining experiences like this. Perhaps next time we should choose somewhere more accessible. The implication that I was too unsophisticated for Lucielle was the latest in a long series of insults, but this time it was public, deliberate, and impossible to misinterpret. I saw the waiter wince at Constance's words, and suddenly I felt sorry for him trapped in this uncomfortable situation. Rick looked torn, glancing between me and his mother, clearly unsure how to handle the situation without causing a scene. In that moment of hesitation, I saw our entire marriage reflected. His constant balancing act between his wife and his domineering mother, his reluctance to truly stand up to Constance, his hope that if we just ignored the problem long enough, it would somehow resolve itself. The dinner continued with strained conversation, the other guests making a show of enjoying their expensive steaks while I sat with an empty place setting. Rick had insisted on giving me half of his meal, which only highlighted the awkwardness of the situation. Constance carried on as if nothing unusual had happened, discussing an upcoming charity gala and the renovations to her vacation home in Aspen. When dessert arrived, I thought surely the humiliation was complete. I was wrong. The waiters brought out a custom cake elegantly decorated with the words, "Celebrating the Harrington Legacy," in gold script. As Constance made a show of cutting the first piece, she launched into a speech about family tradition and the importance of carrying on the Harrington name. "Richard has always understood what it means to be a Harrington," she said, her gaze pointedly avoiding me. "The responsibility, the standards, the commitment to excellence in everything we do. Tonight we celebrate not just a promotion, but the continuation of a legacy that will endure for generations." She raised her champagne glass in a toast. "To the Harrington legacy, past, present, and future." Everyone raised their glasses, repeating the toast. I noticed that even in this I had been excluded. My champagne glass had never been refilled after the initial toast. As pieces of cake were distributed around the table, once again skipping my place setting, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and humiliation were still there, but now they were being overshadowed by a clarity I had never experienced before. In deliberately excluding me from this meal, Constance had finally shown her true colours in a way that couldn't be explained away or minimised. For 4 years, I had tried to earn her approval to prove myself worthy of her son and the Harrington name. I had diminished myself, swallowed insults, and made excuses for inexcusable behaviour. And for what? To sit at a table where I was literally not allowed to eat, to watch my husband hesitate to defend me, to pretend that if I just tried harder, was more patient, more understanding, things would eventually change. As this realization washed over me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The question was no longer whether Constance would ever accept me. She had made her position crystal clear. The real question was what I was going to do about it and what kind of future I wanted for myself. I looked around the table at these people who had just witnessed my humiliation, some with enjoyment, others with discomfort, but none with enough courage to speak up. I thought about the years of subtle put-downs, the constant reminders that I wasn't good enough, the way Constance had systematically tried to undermine my marriage. And I thought about the news I had received just yesterday, news I had planned to share with Rick privately after this dinner. News that changed everything. I caught the eye of the waiter who had been trying to help me throughout the evening. Something in my expression must have communicated my decision, because he gave me a small nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, I prepared to take action in a way that would shock everyone at the table. Not with an emotional outburst or a dramatic exit, but with a calm assertion of my own worth, that none of them, especially Constance, would ever forget. I sat perfectly still for a moment, observing the scene around me. The animated conversations, the clink of crystal, the easy laughter of people who had never questioned their place in the world. No one was paying attention to the woman with the empty place setting. I was invisible, which was exactly what Constance had intended. But not for much longer. I reached for my water glass and tapped it gently with my spoon. The crystal produced a clear, resonant sound that cut through the conversation. Heads turned toward me in surprise. No one had expected me to draw attention to myself after the earlier humiliations. "I'd like to say something if I may," I said, my voice stronger and more composed than I had expected. Constance's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "Valerie, dear, we're in the middle of a celebration. Perhaps this isn't the time for speeches." "On the contrary," I replied, standing slowly, "this is exactly the time for clarity." The table fell silent. Even the waiters paused in their movement, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "For 4 years," I began, "I have tried to be part of this family. I've changed how I dress, how I speak, even what I think is acceptable treatment. I've swallowed insults disguised as helpful advice. I've tolerated being treated as an accessory rather than a person. All because I love your son, and I believed that eventually my patience and goodwill would be recognized." I looked directly at Constance, whose face had hardened into a mask of displeasure. "Tonight has made one thing abundantly clear. I will never be family in your eyes, no matter what I do. No matter that I am legally your daughter-in-law. No matter that I have supported Rick through every step of his career. no matter that I have conducted myself with dignity despite constant undermining. Rick stood up, distress evident on his face. Valerie. I held up my hand. Please, Rick, for once I need you to just listen. Is anything wrong? To my surprise, he nodded and remained silent, though he moved closer to my end of the table. What you may not realize, Constance, I continued, is that family isn't defined by a last name or a legacy or a social position. Family is defined by love, respect, and mutual support. By that definition, I have failed to find a family here. I turned to Rick, whose face reflected a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Rick, I love you. I have from the moment we met. But love isn't enough if it doesn't come with respect and courage. Every time your mother has belittled me and you've remained silent, a little piece of our foundation has crumbled. Constance attempted to interrupt. This is ridiculous. Richard, control your wife. The command hung in the air, revealing more about our dynamic than any example I could have given. I'm not a horse to be controlled, I said calmly. I'm a person with feelings and dignity, and I've reached my limit. I took a deep breath, knowing my next words would change everything. I found out yesterday that I'm pregnant. Gasps echoed around the table. Rick's eyes widened in shock, then filled with joy that quickly turned to confusion as he processed the context of my announcement. I'm carrying your grandchild, Constance, a new generation of Harringtons. I had planned to tell Rick privately after this dinner to celebrate this milestone in our life together. Instead, I'm announcing it in a room where I wasn't considered family enough to be served a meal. I placed my hand protectively over my still flat stomach. I will not raise my child in an environment where their mother is treated as an outsider. I will not teach them that it's acceptable to sit quietly while someone you love is humiliated. And I will not pass on the lesson that family is about status rather than love. The silence in the room was absolute. William's face had gone pale, and for the first time I saw him looking at his wife with something like disappointment. Audrey was staring at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. Even Constance's friends seemed uncomfortable now that the deliberate cruelty of the evening had been laid bare. I reached into my purse and pulled out my car keys. I'm going home now, not to make a scene or to punish anyone, but because I deserve basic respect, and that's not available here. I looked at Rick, whose face reflected the internal struggle I had seen so many times before. Torn between his mother and his wife, between the family he was born into and the one he had chosen to create. Rick, you need to decide what kind of man, husband and father you want to be. I love you, but I will not compete with your mother for the rest of our lives. When you're ready to put our family first, truly first, you know where to find me. Home. With that, I nodded to the waiter who had tried to help me throughout the evening. Thank you for your kindness and professionalism. It was noticed and appreciated. Then I walked out of the Phoenix room with my head held high, ignoring Constance's sputtered attempts to regain control of the situation. As I passed through the main dining room, I heard the murmur of conversations and the gentle clink of cutlery. A normal dinner service, continuing while my world shifted on its axis. Outside, the valet looked surprised to see me leaving alone, but quickly retrieved my car. As I slipped into the driver's seat, I finally allowed the tears I had been holding back to fall. But they weren't tears of humiliation or defeat. They were tears of release, of letting go of an impossible situation and choosing my own worth over the approval I would never receive. I didn't drive home. Instead, I found myself turning toward the one place I knew I would find unconditional support, my best friend Emma's apartment. Emma opened her door, took one look at my tear-stained face and immediately pulled me into a hug. What happened? She asked, leading me to her couch and wrapping a throw blanket around my shoulders. Between sobs, I told her everything. The empty place settings, Constance's public declaration that I wasn't family, Rick's hesitation to defend me, and my own shocking response. You told them you're pregnant, Emma gasped. In front of everyone. I nodded, already second-guessing my decision. I shouldn't have done that. It was supposed to be a special moment with Rick, not ammunition in a family battle. Emma handed me a mug of tea. Under normal circumstances, I'd agree, but these weren't normal circumstances. Constance orchestrated a public humiliation. You responded with a public truth. As the evening wore on, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from Rick. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there to say that hadn't already been said? You should at least let him know you're safe, Emma suggested gently. He must be worried sick. She was right. I sent a brief text. I'm safe at Emma's. I need space tonight. His response came immediately. "Please talk to me. I love you." I put the phone away, unable to engage further. Emma made up her guest room and gave me a pair of pajamas. "Get some sleep," she said. "Everything looks different in the morning, but sleep eluded me." I kept replaying the evening in my mind, the looks on everyone's faces when I stood up, the shock when I announced my pregnancy, the uncertainty in Rick's eyes when faced with a clear choice between his mother and me. Had I overreacted? Had I just destroyed my marriage? What would happen to my baby now that I'd thrown our family into chaos? Around midnight, Emma's doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Rick standing on the porch, still in his dinner clothes, looking disheveled and desperate. "Should I send him away?" Emma asked. I shook my head. "No, we need to talk." Rick entered the apartment like a man walking into a storm. His eyes red-rimmed and his tie loosened. When he saw me, he stopped short as if afraid to approach. "Emma, would you give us a minute?" I asked. She nodded, squeezing my shoulder as she passed. "I'll be in my room if you need me." When we were alone, Rick and I stared at each other across the room, 4 years of marriage and countless unspoken tensions between us. "Are you really pregnant?" He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. 10 weeks. I found out yesterday. I was going to tell you after the dinner." He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of me, taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "For tonight, for every time I didn't stand up for you, for putting you in a position where you felt you had to make that kind of statement. I failed you as a husband." The raw honesty in his voice broke through my defenses. "Yes, you have," I agreed softly. "But the question is, what happens now?" Rick took a deep breath. "After you left, I told my mother exactly what I think of her behavior. I told her that what she did was unforgivable, not just tonight, but the years of subtle cruelty and exclusion. I told her that if she couldn't respect you, truly respect you, not just tolerate your existence, then she wouldn't be welcome in our lives." I stared at him in disbelief. In 4 years, Rick had never directly confronted his mother about her treatment of me. What did she say? She tried to justify it at first, said she was protecting the family name, that you weren't raised with the right values or background. She actually suggested that once the baby is born, she could help guide the child's upbringing to ensure they're a true Harrington. My stomach clenched at the thought of Constance trying to mold our child in her image. And I told her that wasn't happening, that our child would be raised by their parents, you and me, according to our values, that if she wanted any relationship with her grandchild, she would need to completely rethink how she treats you. For the first time since walking out of the restaurant, I felt a flicker of hope. What changed Rick? "You've defended me before, but never like this." He ran a hand through his hair. "When you stood up at that table speaking with such dignity, despite how my mother had treated you, I saw you clearly. Not just as my wife who I love, but as the strongest, most principled person in that room. And I saw myself through your eyes. A coward who was so afraid of his mother's disapproval that he let the woman carrying his child be publicly humiliated." Tears filled his eyes. "Then you announced the pregnancy and everything shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't just about you and me and my mother's games. It was about our child, a human being who would learn from our example what to accept, what to value, how to treat others, and expect to be treated in return." I felt my own tears starting again. That's exactly what I was thinking. I don't want our child to grow up watching their mother being treated as less than, and I don't want them to see their father unable to stand up for what's right. "I know," Rick said, "and I promise you that ends tonight." My father pulled me aside before I left the restaurant. He said he's enabled my mother's behavior for decades, and watching tonight unfold made him realize the damage it's done to our family. He's on our side, Valerie. "It's not about sides," I said tiredly. "It's about basic respect." "You're right," Rick acknowledged. And I should have insisted on that from day one. I was so used to my mother's controlling behavior that I didn't see how toxic it was until tonight, when she finally went too far to ignore. He gripped my hands tighter. "I'm not asking you to come home tonight. I understand that you need space. But I am asking for a chance to prove that I can be the husband you deserve, the father our child deserves." I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse, but also a new determination that hadn't been there before. "What does that look like practically, Rick? Because I can't go back to the way things were." "I don't want to either," he assured me. "Practically, it means couples therapy to work on our communication and boundary setting. It means I maintain the distance I've established with my mother until she demonstrates real change, which may never happen, and I need to be okay with that. It means putting you and our baby first without question or hesitation. He hesitated, then added, it might also mean moving, away from this city, away from my mother's influence. A fresh start where we can build our family on our terms. The suggestion shocked me. Rick's entire life, his friends, his work, his identity was rooted in this city. That he would consider leaving showed just how seriously he was taking this moment. I don't know if that's necessary, I said carefully, but I appreciate that you're willing to consider it. We talked for hours dissecting what had gone wrong in our marriage and how we might fix it. By the time dawn was breaking, we had a tentative plan. I would stay with Emma for a few days while Rick found us a marriage counsellor. We would attend therapy both individually and as a couple. Rick would maintain limited contact with his mother with clear conditions for any future relationship. As Rick was preparing to leave, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small jewelry box. I stopped at home before coming here, he explained, opening the box to reveal a simple silver pendant in the shape of a tree. It's a family tree. I had it custom made weeks ago for your birthday, but it seems right to give it to you now. Our family, you, me, and the baby, that's what matters. Not the Harrington name, not my mother's approval, just us. He placed the necklace in my palm and closed my fingers around it. Take all the time you need, Valerie. I'll be waiting and I'll be working to be better, for you and for our child. As I watched him walk to his car, exhaustion and hope battled within me. I didn't know if we could repair what had been broken, but for the first time in our marriage, I felt like we were both finally fighting for the same thing. The next 6 months were among the hardest and most transformative of my life. True to his word, Rick found us an excellent marriage counsellor who specialised in family dynamics and boundary issues. Dr. Jensen didn't offer easy solutions or quick fixes, but she provided us with tools to communicate more effectively and strategies for dealing with Constance's attempts to reassert control. And there were many such attempts. After the initial shock wore off, Constance launched a multi-pronged campaign to regain her position of influence. She started with guilt, sending Rick emotional messages about how he had humiliated her in front of her friends, how a son should respect his mother, how family should come before all else. When that didn't work, she tried bribery, offering us the down payment for a larger house, suggesting she could pay off my student loans, promising to set up a trust fund for the baby. When these tactics failed to produce results, she switched to more direct methods. She showed up at our house unannounced, tried to involve other family members in mediating the situation, and even attempted to contact my parents to form an alliance against what she called my emotional manipulation of Rick. Throughout it all, Rick remained steadfast in his commitment to our boundaries. He returned his mother's gifts, limited communication, to brief factual responses, and made it clear that her relationship with us, and with her future grandchild, depended entirely on her ability to respect me as his wife and the mother of his child. I moved back home after a week at Emma's, but our reconciliation was tentative at first. Years of unaddressed issues couldn't be resolved overnight. In therapy, we learned that Rick's difficulty standing up to his mother stemmed from a childhood where her approval was both essential and unpredictable. I came to understand how my own insecurities had sometimes made me passive in the face of Constance's manipulations, afraid that asserting myself would confirm her belief that I wasn't good enough for her son. As my pregnancy progressed, Rick became increasingly protective. Not in a controlling way, but in a partnership way. He accompanied me to every doctor's appointment, read parenting books late into the night, and transformed our spare bedroom into a nursery painting, the walls himself despite Constance's offer to hire a professional decorator. We decided not to find out the baby's gender, wanting at least one aspect of our child's identity to be free from expectations and preconceptions. When we discussed names, we deliberately avoided family names, heirs, from either side, choosing instead ones that resonated with us personally. 3 months after the restaurant incident, Rick received a job offer from an architectural firm in Denver, specializing in sustainable design, his passion. We discussed it seriously, weighing the professional opportunity against the prospect of uprooting our lives. "What do you think?" Rick asked as we sat on our back porch one evening, the autumn air crisp around us. It would mean leaving everything familiar, starting over in a new city, but it would also mean distance from my mother, a chance to establish our family on our own terms. I considered the question carefully, my hand resting on my growing belly. "I think we should make this decision based on what's best for us, for our future, not as a reaction to your mother, If the job is what you want professionally, if Denver feels right for our family, then let's do it. But not just to escape. Rick smiled a genuine smile that reached his eyes in a way it hadn't for months before our confrontation. That's fair and honest. In the end, we decided to stay. The job in Denver was excellent, but Rick's firm countered with a more flexible schedule and the opportunity to lead their new green initiative. More importantly, we realized that running away wouldn't solve the core issues. We needed to establish healthy boundaries wherever we lived. Meanwhile, a surprising development occurred with Constance. After months of failed manipulation tactics, she seemed to hit a wall. William, who had always been passive in the face of his wife's controlling behavior, finally took a stand. He told her that her actions were destroying their family and threatened to move out if she didn't seek help. The threat was enough to shock Constance into action. She began seeing a therapist who specialized in narcissistic personality traits and control issues. No one expected dramatic changes. Patterns established over decades don't disappear overnight, but it was a start. 5 months after the restaurant incident, Constance requested a meeting with us. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near our home. I was 7 months pregnant by then, my body unmistakably carrying the next generation of Harringtons. Constance arrived alone without her usual armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup. She looked smaller, somehow less intimidating. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her eyes darting between us nervously. "I know I have no right to expect your time." Rick took my hand under the table, a silent show of solidarity. "What did you want to discuss, Mom?" Constance took a deep breath. "I want to apologize. Properly apologize, not make excuses or justify my behavior. What I did at LaCielle was cruel and deliberate. It was the culmination of years of trying to control you, Richard, and undermine your marriage. I convinced myself I was protecting the family legacy, but the truth is I was protecting my own ego and sense of control." She turned to me directly. "Valerie, I have treated you abominably from the moment Richard brought you home. Not because of anything you did or didn't do, but because you represented a life for my son that I couldn't control. I'm deeply ashamed of my behavior, and while I don't expect forgiveness, I want you to know that I'm working to change." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd become so familiar with. Instead, I saw something new, genuine remorse and a vulnerability that the carefully constructed Constance Harrington had never allowed herself to show. "I appreciate your apology," I said carefully, "but words are easy. It's actions that matter." She nodded. "You're right. That's why I'm not asking for anything today. Not forgiveness, not access to your lives or the baby. I'm simply letting you know that I'm committed to doing the work necessary to earn back your trust however long that takes." Rick looked as surprised as I felt. "What does that work look like, Mom?" "Therapy twice a week," she replied. "Learning to recognize my controlling behaviors and their impact on others. Understanding the difference between love and possession." She hesitated, then added, "Your father has been attending some sessions with me. It's been illuminating for both of us." We left that meeting cautiously optimistic but realistic. One conversation couldn't undo years of damage, but it was a beginning. As my due date approached, we established clear boundaries for the birth and early weeks with the baby. Constance accepted these without argument. Another small sign of progress. When our daughter Lily Grace was born on a snowy February morning, we sent a simple text announcement to both families. My parents drove in immediately. Constance and William waited for an invitation, which we extended 3 days later. When Constance held her granddaughter for the first time, I saw something shift in her expression, a softening, a recognition of something larger than herself or her need for control. "She's perfect," she whispered, looking from the baby to me with new respect in her eyes. "You did this. You created this miracle." It was the first genuinely warm interaction we'd ever shared. 1 year after the infamous dinner at LaCielle, our lives have transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Lily is now 6 months old, a curious, happy baby who has her father's eyes and my smile. Rick has become the kind of husband and father I always believed he could be, present, supportive, and unafraid to stand his ground when it matters. Our relationship with Constance is still a work in progress. There are good days when she respects our boundaries and seems genuinely interested in building a healthy relationship with us. There are also setbacks, moments when old patterns emerge and we need to reinforce our limits. But the important difference is that we face these challenges as a united front, and Constance is at least trying to change her behavior. William has undergone his own transformation, finding his voice after decades in his wife's shadow. He's become a devoted grandfather, often stopping by on his own to spend time with Lily and check in on us. "I should have done better by you both," he told us once. "I won't make the same mistake with my granddaughter." The most significant change, though, has been within myself. Standing up at that dinner table was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I found my voice that night, not in anger or retaliation, but in a calm assertion of my own worth. I stopped trying to earn a place in a family that didn't value me, and instead began building the family I wanted to be part of. Last week, Constance invited us to dinner at her home. A simple family meal, not a formal occasion. As we sat around the table, I noticed that she had placed me next to Rick across from herself. There were no good or bad seats, no hierarchy of importance. Just family sharing a meal. When Lily fussed during dinner, Constance didn't criticize my parenting or try to take over. Instead, she asked if there was anything she could do to help. It was a small moment, but it represented a fundamental shift in our dynamic. Later, as we were preparing to leave, Constance pulled me aside. "I want to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked, surprised. "For having the courage to stand up that night at Le Ciel. It was painful and humiliating at the time, but it forced me to confront what I was becoming. Without that moment, I might never have recognized how my behavior was destroying my relationship with my son and preventing me from knowing my granddaughter." She looked over at Rick, who was buckling Lily into her car seat. "You were right about what family really means. It's not about names or legacies or social position. It's about love and respect and mutual support. I'm still learning, but I'm trying to be better." I nodded, acknowledging both her effort and the long road still ahead. That's all any of us can do. As we drove home, Lily sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Rick reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of us," he said simply, "of how far we've come." I smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. That night at Le Ciel, when I stood up and found my voice, wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The beginning of a marriage based on mutual respect rather than compromise of parenthood, founded on our values rather than inherited expectations of a family defined by love rather than last names. Standing up for yourself is rarely easy, especially against people who are supposed to love you. But sometimes it's the only way to create the life and relationships you deserve. Sometimes the most shocking action is simply refusing to accept less than your worth. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who didn't treat you with respect? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories, and share this with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve a seat at the table, always, no questions asked.